Again, I'm Patra Brannon-Issac. I serve as a Regional Director of Leadership ISD and have been in this role about a year and a half. I am a native Houstonian, a product of public schools in Southwest Houston. I graduated from the school that Chris shared, Lamar High School, and I'm just extremely grateful to be leading and participating in work that has truly changed my life and changed the lives of others, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I get the pleasure of building on the previous speakers, and so I'd love to say that as Chris has shared the models of public education and ways to innovate within them, and Jasmine has shared the political will side, I want to complement that by talking about the community engagement. How do we activate more of the electorate to participate in this process, and how that can really apply pressure to get the outcomes that we want to see. So with that, I'd love to start with this slide. I've actually heard two data points quoted, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but when we look at civic participation in Harris County, 9% is just dismal. And I always share with people, 9% of people are participating in the election process, but we all have something to say about where we might send our children to schools, or where we think others should send their kids to schools. And so we've got to do more to be engaged in that process. Again, when we think about Harris County in 24 or 25 districts, depending on how you draw the line, serving close to 1 million students, we know that we have to think about what's going to happen to the trajectory of those kids in the long term. And simply, this data shows that the education system as it stands and the practices and policies within it are simply not creating the outcomes that we want to see. So how do we change that? With Leadership ISD, we've spent a lot of time over the last year since our inception in 3 counties, and I'll get to that in a second, but really thinking about our strategic clarity. And we believe, as a 501c3 educational advocacy organization, in a Texas that really does offer hope and opportunity to every child. So we talk about that equity component, that the system hasn't been designed for all students to succeed. We are irrational optimists about that, and how to get to that. We look at our mission as informing, connecting, and activating civic leaders, community leaders, and various stakeholders to get engaged in this civic process. So that's really our mission. I appreciate being a part of an organization where our mission really does help to convey the work that we're poised to do. And so I'll share that. But the impact that we're looking at, we do draw a stake in the line and align to the state standards of educational outcomes by 2030. I mean, we have to if we're going to really measure how we're moving the needle. And so that 300,000 more students really receiving that certificate, a college degree, post-secondary certificate is really a measure of how we're moving the needle in each of our 3 regions currently, 10 percentage points. And so that's an outcome that we want to look at, and we're being very intentional about how we're measuring towards that. So I was asked to talk about how do we engage as citizens and what can we do about this? And really, it's a matter of a pathway to civic renewal. We do see a lot of civic apathy in our communities. And so for us, these are priorities, these are levers that we're pulling on through our programming. And so we start that with really equipping diverse leaders. Again, we're starting with a Civic Voices Fellowship, which is more corporate and community leaders, but eventually we will get down into educator, parent, and student voices as well through our programming. But the goal is you can't be activated if you're not more informed about the things that you're hearing about today, and about many of the other issues and the nuances within those. So we focus on equipping the diverse leaders and then ensuring public action. We do not consider ourselves a leadership development program, but rather a civic capacity building program that beyond just getting the information and exploring it, you're actually poised and supported to actually take action. And then finally, we certainly believe in elevating school boards, as both Chris and Jasmine mentioned, in particular preparing potential candidates. And I'll talk about the prospects for that in a second, but also supporting sitting trustees. I'm really happy to share the progress even with one of our fellows who's a sitting trustee for Spring ISD and has really shared the progress that he's made as a trustee through the program, and how it's helped him think more intentionally about the issues. And then we have 4 trustees who've applied to our program for this next year. So it really is showing how we're poised to even tackle governance by having more informed leaders over our schools. all of this we believe would improve student outcomes and at a system level, because again, affecting the community, equipping them more is a systemic approach to, and that's the work that we believe in. So I wanted to give you a taste of the Civic Voices Fellowship. Really, these are the topics that we explore over a 10-month period. We start really broad and then start narrowing in on more topical information. Really, it's really interesting because even Chris and Jasmine have mentioned two of the topics that are probably the toughest for our fellows to really grapple with, and that's understanding the role of governance. You know, Jasmine named three things. People really don't understand that those are really the three roles of an elected trustee, because oftentimes you don't see that play out in the school system when you're observing that. And also choice. You know, people really don't, some people relegate choice to a simple voucher conversation. We talk about portfolio districts, as Chris really conveyed earlier. We talk about choice models and mechanisms and help people understand that nuance. So that's what our programming is about over 10 months. And then because of the people in our program, people from corporate, folks who are leading the work in nonprofits, they really bring these topics to life and enrich the perspective. I have the pleasure of looking at one of our fellows in the room, who, Elena White, if you ever want to ask her about some of the work, I'm sure she'd be happy to share that with you. But in general, this is what offers diverse perspectives on our work, and we convene leaders to share around these topics. It's not just us facilitating, but really the experts, the practitioners, and certainly the students in the field we're hearing from. The enduring aspect of our work is not the program itself, it's what the program creates. And that's the capacity for networking, skill building, lots of connections, lots of progression in the work just from those connections and people in our movement. So I'd love to share the early impact in Houston and talk a little bit about what's happening in our other regions. We just wrapped up our inaugural class, and I'm looking at the data the other day, really happy to report these numbers of more content knowledge and really understanding of the issues. Over 90% of our fellows feel that way, specifically around governance, school choice, school finance, and accountability topics, so they're understanding that at deeper levels. We have mindset questions that we ask of our fellows. If you really believe that strong governance is going to change the needle, will you be more activated to ensure that you're holding officials accountable, supporting them? This isn't just about bash any elected trustee. This is about how do we elevate and support their work. And so our fellows feel more strongly about that. Just in the class of 40 fellows that we have now, 58% of them have reported stronger interest in running for elected office. So we are a pipeline of candidates potentially to organizations like Houston GPS and any other PAC that might endorse them. We also have candidates interested in State Board of Education as well. I have 1,300 down here because really this isn't about a fellowship with 40 individuals. This is about growing programming that supports potentially 1,300 advocates and policymakers in our ecosystem here in Harris County through the programming that we might offer. And so think about the exponential effect of that when you have these kinds of individuals helping to shape policy better, leading strategically in nonprofit boards, and doing the things to hold our communities accountable for the educational outcomes we want. I also wanted to share a little bit about some early issue advocacy that our fellows have adopted, and really this is a lot of their work and exploration through deep empathy exercises. And so this isn't an exclusive list. There are definitely other issues that our fellows are tackling. But in Harris, they're looking at more trauma-informed policy and practices. That's a huge bucket. So there's continued work after the fellowship to drill down on that. There are lots of policies that support getting more equitable resources and attention to that in our schools. Some of our fellows are looking at post-secondary pathways. We know about the House Bill 5, or if you don't know about that piece of legislation, we're looking at what are the equity conversations within that and trying to drill down to really understanding that better and ultimately developing advocacy around that. And it doesn't mean in support of that legislation completely. It means how can we refine it and make it better so that it's meeting the needs that it was intended to. We have a group looking at a lot of the work that's happening that Jasmine mentioned in HISD. There's a lot to get your head around in that, so our fellows are very busy trying to keep up with what's happening with the current takeover, but also a lot of the other conversations on the table around magnets, around budgeting structures, etc. And finally, we are very focused on listening to the experts who are receiving this education, and that's our students. And so we invited them to some of our programming, but we're really looking to elevate the student voice work through our programming in the coming years. So we have a group who's focused on that. There are pockets of that happening in Harris County, but we certainly aren't where we are in terms of listening to what those needs are from our students. So this is just a glimpse of the work. It started in the fellowship. I love to tell the fellows that you're not going anywhere. We are connected for life. And so we actually have programming in the alumni status to really help them go deeper into Empathy 2.0 around each issue, to really conduct landscape analysis around what's happening across our various ISDs. We are here in support of all of Harris County. And to really then start developing more thoughtful advocacy with an equity lens. That's what we're here for. And I'll share my story in a second that really kind of speaks to this civic renewal and civic engagement. I just wanted to share a little bit about our key milestones. We, again, started in Dallas in 2010. We graduated our first cohort about a year and a half later in Dallas, and then we moved into Fort Worth, Tarrant County. And the work in Harris County started in June 2016. I was hired last year and got us hopefully, I guess I'd say a great group of applicants, 100 applications, and we selected 40 from that. We have expanded our team to 3. I have a director of policy, advocacy, and programming, and also another program associate to help us with this work. And then we are actually in the process, starting today, of doing interviews for our second cohort. We're very selective in our programming. We want people who are not coming in with an agenda and not willing to be open and grow. So we're conducting 73 interviews to figure out where, what that means for people who can carry the equity-minded work forward. And so we're really excited about that, but even looking ahead, our programming will expand starting in the fall. And really it's just a matter of how are we amplifying the work of our fellows to really affect change in the system. This is my virtual card, but I wanted to end with just kind of a quick story on civic renewal. Myself, I'm not an educator by trade. I actually came into this work as a very random career pivot that I'm very fortunate to have had. It was to leave ExxonMobil and go to lead talent acquisition in HISD. And when I did that, of course I had my business mind and brought that to the work. But I had so many questions about why we do things a certain way in the system. And I did that for about 4.5 years, and this opportunity came about to lead this work. So I'm learning while I'm leading, and I have to say that in a year's, I guess a year and a half, that short period of time, I have just absorbed so much, learned so much, to be able to speak about the issues, the House Bill 1842, 1882, all of the policy that affects what's happening in our schools. All it takes is just a little concentration around that, and we can be far more educated about what's happening. So I share my story only to talk about what's possible when we think about an entire community being activated at all levels. And I'm really talking about parents whose voices never get activated or aren't asked what do they want for their schools. The other thing I'll say is that it definitely is system change when you think about we have to have civil discourse around these issues. When we talk about closing schools, you can't make that decision from afar. It must be a hyper-local community decision, and that's what we're trying to equip our fellows to do.